Today, we're diving into the art of drawing a water drop. And after I teach you this, you'll immediately learn how you can use it to draw more complex things like this nose. You'll basically be on a fast track to having your art on display next to the Mona Lisa, because this little droplet will give you all the foundational necessities for elevating your artistry to pro status. So let's splash into the tutorial and see how it all works. Side note, I know that not everyone watching will have the same fancy art tools I'm using, so right now you're watching me draw this using the cheapest materials possible, just to make sure that you can still create a masterpiece on a budget. It's like cooking a gourmet meal with the dollar store ingredients. Plus, I firmly believe that practicing with low-quality tools can actually level up your skills. It's like training with ankle weights. When you finally take them off, you feel like you can fly. So let's get started. First, we'll examine our reference picture to get a good idea of where to begin. We're specifically studying the droplet shape, shadow placements and their shapes, and the shape and placement of the highlights as well. There's also this fun little stock image camera watermark that I won't be drawing, but you're more than welcome to. So to start, we use our 5H pencil, which is the lightest pencil shade that I have. We delicately sketch the drop's outline and shadow shapes, and then erase it to serve as our guidelines. We also mark out the reflection area because we want to keep this little box untouched as much as possible. But now the shading can begin. Continuing with my 5H pencil, you can see the tip is as flat as a pancake. I use sandpaper or a nail filer to give it that perfect flattened edge so that it can glide along the paper like a hockey puck on ice. With this flat tip, I'm not applying any pressure. I'm just gently caressing the paper, using delicate circular strokes to try and avoid creating visible pencil marks. Once we're content with our shading, it's time to blend it all out. I'm using a blending stump, which I highly recommend you buy. A Q-tip can work just as well, but it does require a lot more effort and precision to get the same result. Now, we just take our blending tool and just rub it all over the shaded area until it looks smoother than a baby dolphin. Remember, circular motions are key here to achieve a seamless blended result. Now that we have the outer region blended, we're going to basically be taking some of that shading from the outside and spreading it inward to fill in the middle. There's no need to add extra pencil shading to this area, since it's not very dark in the first place, and we can use the leftovers. You might have to use a little more pressure than before, since you're spreading such a thin layer. But it will all connect in the middle with some patience. I then grab my 2H pencil to start darkening up the shading that borders the outer region. And then, as I'm sure you could have guessed, we blend it all out again. After looking at the reference picture, I realized that I got a little unhinged with the blending, and this area turned out way too dark. So I quickly lightened and reshaped it with my eraser and smoothed it out with the blender. Which leads us to begin focusing on some of the finer details. Still with our 2H pencil, we're going to add this dark shadow line bordering the left side of the drop that extends around the bottom. We're also going to be using the same 2H pencil for the last bit of shading on the right side to generally darken up this whole crescent area. Now we're taking a different approach in blending out this left to bottom side. Rather than blending inward like before, we're actually going to use the shading and pull it outward to form the shadow that the drop casts outside of its body onto the ground. When we're satisfied with the blending, we use our eraser to clean up the reflection area, getting it as accurate to the reference shape and clear of shading as possible. And we're going to use our eraser to clean up any shading that escaped the body of the drop. And finally, we're going to use an 8B pencil, the darkest pencil that I have, to create one final dark border between the shadow inside and outside of the drop. Now this segment is a literal repeat of all the exact same steps we just did, word for word. I basically repeated almost the entire process over again to darken up and refine the image and make it look a little more detailed. And here it is, our completed water drop. Now we move on to the fun part of the tutorial. Now, it's pretty obvious that this drawing looks nothing like a nose unless we're talking about Super Mario or the old guy from the movie Up, but we aren't. So let's talk about how we're going to turn this into more complex shapes to create a nose. When we learn to draw the water drop, we learn the four most important components of drawing. We learn shaping, shading, blending, and detailing. Now, with some practice on shaping, we can take the water drop and imagine another water drop rolled over and collided with it. We get something that we already know how to shade, blend, and detail, but it's simply reshaped. If we then slap one more drop on top of the duo, we can start to see a shape that resembles a nose. But we can slightly curve these lines down to match the reference shape more closely. And our nose is too short and stumpy, so we can address this by simply reshaping this drop into more of a long oval with some touch-ups at the top. And we end up with this dazzling, glorious nose, made entirely from our water drops. Now let's hop right back in and put that concept on paper. We're going to start by sketching the center circle and the two others on both sides that are slightly smaller and overlapping the center circle. We're going to make little adjustments until it resembles that nose shape, and then erase it to use as guidelines. Now the shapes for our shadows here are a little different than the water drop. What we're going to do is draw curved lines up through the center of both side circles. They kind of look like two little basketballs. Or maybe not actually, I don't know, but whatever. We're then quickly going to darken the outline of the nostrils so that we can see the big picture and begin shading and shaping the whole nose. We start by filling in the two hourglass-shaped areas between these lines with shading. We can also outline the tip of the nose a little better so that we can start shading the middle as well. We're going to continue that shading right up to the tops of both nostrils, and then we're almost ready for blending. So obviously, noses have bridges. So to get those going, we simply draw two lines coming up from where the circles meet on either side. And now we can blend everything that we've shaded and start to give the drawing some life. Notice how right here, I pull some of the shading from these corners and use them to make little triangles that round these areas out. This is how we make super smooth transitions from noses to the rest of a face when we eventually learn to draw full portraits. I'll speed through this next segment because it's literally just outlining the nostrils for more depth. Up until here, I add two little half-circle shaped shaded areas. This is because people typically have little indents here that lead to their nostrils and create shadows. And again, I'll speed through this part because for some reason, I keep obsessively outlining and blending, even though it was definitely already dark enough. But now we can start to get some detailing that will really make a difference. I'm going to start with shading a bit of a pinch on the bridge of the nose to give it a more narrow shape, basically like contouring a nose with makeup. Congratulations, you're a makeup artist now. We blend that out with our beauty blender and generally smooth everything out as much as possible. We're then going to add some more depth with our 2H pencil by lightly shading the side of the nose that dips towards the cheek. And we're also going to put a little arch of shade right here that rounds out the tip of the nose because I felt like it looked too much like Squidward's nose, and it was bugging me. Lastly, we add that same 2H shading of a dip towards the cheek on the right side to give that same dimension and symmetry to the nose. And for our final step, we blend it all out. Now, just like for the water drop, there's more that I wanted to add that I didn't feel was necessary to explain because you're well aware at this point that it's just a cycle of shading and blending. But if you're having trouble getting to that point, please let me know in the comments and I'll do an in-depth tutorial for those as well. But you can be expecting more tutorials regardless because I loved making this video and I would love your feedback in the comments or support with a like. So if you don't want to miss the next lesson, make sure to subscribe and I'll see you next time.